It's Wednesday here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It's the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've got Ray Fittipaldo on. I want to talk about Kaleb Johnson with Ray. We did a film study, and we think there's a specific way that he can fit Arthur Smith's offense better than Najee Harris did. We'll talk about that. We'll also examine what Omar Khan's been doing in the middle rounds and how he's been hitting those as an important part of rebuilding the Steelers roster. And finally, what are some of the notes now that we've seen the full Steelers NFL draft that can teach us how Omar Khan operates in this draft, in draft classes? We'll talk about all that here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in an accident or you need help with workers' compensation, Edgar Snyder Associates has your back. Call them at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they've got money for you, or they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about Kaleb Johnson here, because when we look at the Steelers and how they assembled this draft class, we knew running back was a priority. They brought in nine running backs for their top 30 visits. That was a serious indication they were going there. After they got their D tackle in the first round, in the third round, they went and got Kaleb Johnson out of Iowa. And Ray, a lot of people immediately wanted to compare him to Najee Harris because he's 6'1". They measure very similarly. They're both big-bodied backs that didn't run top speeds. But when I looked at the way Kaleb Johnson ran, and I ran a film study about this, so go to post-gazette.com to check that out. But when I looked at the way Kaleb Johnson runs, he fits a lot more of a zone scheme that Iowa ran than Najee Harris did. Now, when you look at Najee Harris and what he did for the Steelers last year, the Steelers under Arthur Smith called the sixth highest percentage of zone runs in the NFL last year. Najee Harris did okay. He averaged like 4 yards per carry on those. But Kaleb Johnson averaged like 6.8 yards per carry behind the zone runs and looked much more naturally a fit in there. And I think that could be the key difference maker that makes him a different player than Najee Harris.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a great fit for Arthur Smith's offense. And I think it was important to find that because I think last year with Najee Harris, they were trying to make it work with a back who wasn't really built for his offense. And, listen, coaches have to be flexible and, players have to be willing to adapt, but that just wasn't a great fit, for Arthur Smith. And Johnson, despite what his time speed at the combine said, 4.57 in the 40-yard dash, when he gets through holes, when he picks his holes, Chris, he hits it, and you see him running away from people at Iowa. So I think it's a good pick. This was a very deep running backs class. They had their choice of several backs. They could have taken it at 83, but when you break it down and you take into account how he's going to fit into this offense, the outside zone scheme, I think there's potential there for Kaleb Johnson to be a big part of this offense and to be a big part of this offense soon.
I think so, because when I look at Kaleb Johnson, when I'm studying him, one thing that he does very well, and I think the real Steelers running back that he compares more to is Le'Veon Bell, because what Le'Veon Bell would do was he would set up not just the first guy to make a miss, but he would set up the second guy and just how he stacked up the zone. He was also very patient behind his blockers. I think Najee Harris, like early on, I think he made whatever he had to work, but Najee Harris never really could trust his offensive line. And that's part on him, but also mostly on just the Steelers offensive line was never good with Najee Harris in the backfield. And so oftentimes, like you see Kaleb Johnson's best runs are not even the ones where he makes a guy miss per se. They're often when he just waits just long enough for his tight end or his guard or his tackle to get out in front of a guy. And then he's like, now's my chance. And he bursts through. But that's because he trusted his blockers at Iowa, and they would often win for him, even against other big teams like Ohio State. And some of the film that I broke down going up against the national champion defense that had several guys that like Jack Sawyer and Tyleik Williams on it that the Steelers were looking at. So I think that could be a big difference, but it has to be compounded with this Steelers offensive line taking a step forward. If they don't make progress and become a much better run blocking unit this year, I think Kaleb Johnson could end up falling to the same things that Najee Harris did and saying, like, I don't know who to trust to win their block. Yeah. And so I'm just going to have to charge forward and just try to make everything myself. And that's not the way you want to operate if you're a rushing offense.
No. And I think, listen, Chris, Troy Fautanu being back, playing right tackle is going to help this offensive line immensely. We'll see about Broderick Jones. I think moving back to the left side should help him, but I think everyone agrees that he's got to develop more consistency and become the player they want him to be. And then everyone else, you know what you have in Isaac Seumalo. I fully expect Zach Frazier to take another step and to be really good. And I think Mason McCormick, based on his play as a rookie, solid, and you just hope that he can be solid again. So you would hope that, Arthur Smith would say to Kaleb Johnson and the other running backs, hey, listen, the offensive line is going to do their job. You do what you do. Don't worry about what they're doing. We'll see what happens in the games. That's easier said than done, but you're right. In some ways, there's got to be a certain trust factor between your running back and his line, and I think the only way that happens is for the line to go out and play better.
Now, here's another factor here. We've been talking about Kaleb Johnson. Where does he fit in with Jaylen Warren right away, Ray? Like, Jaylen Warren has been patiently waiting his turn behind Najee Harris, and I think I think that this is his chance. I think he's going to be RB1 to start the year, but I think that he's not going to be in a position where he can afford to not hit it off the bat right away. He's going to have to show, hey, I've been waiting for this time, and I'm ready to show that I'm the guy.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because Kaleb Johnson really doesn't have third downs in his tool belt. I think Jaylen Warren clearly is the better option on third down. So, you could see a situation early in the year when maybe Jaylen Warren starts. He stays in there for a couple of series. And then you would see Kaleb Johnson come in and spell him first and second downs. And then maybe Jaylen Warren is your third down back all the time. So I fully expect once Kaleb Johnson gets comfortable that, it'll be a pretty even split in carries. But with Jaylen Warren being so good on third down, both in pass protection and as a receiver out of the backfield, well, that's not really Kaleb Johnson's strengths. I think he's going to see the bulk of the work in those situations. So I think, the sweet spot is probably Kaleb Johnson, first and second downs, get him 45% of the touches. And I think it'll be very similar, carry and touch-wise, distribution-wise, same way it was last year with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren.
Absolutely. I want to talk about more of the guys that came after Kaleb Johnson in those middle rounds and how Omar Khan's been using those middle rounds. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates, who also do workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment's over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's actually the insurance company's doctors. They won't be on your side, so you need to get someone on your side. That's Edgar Snyder Associates. Call them today at 1-800-9-4-EDGAR because they will fight for the workers' compensation rights you deserve. That's 1-800-9-4-EDGAR to call Edgar Snyder Associates. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, you wrote about this recently in the Post-Gazette, talking about how Omar Khan's been using the middle rounds this year. They get Jack Sawyer. It's funny when you talk to people about Jack Sawyer, there's some people that are really high on him and some people that are really low on him. But I think ultimately this is a depth position that the Steelers kind of needed to address because we've seen what happens when TJ Watt goes down or needs to come off the field and they need an extra presence on the edge. Last year, they were hoping that'd be Marcus Golden. He ended up retiring. It didn't work out. Now there's no worrying about about missing the guy because they're too old or anything like that. Now you've got him and you got two guys in Herbig and Sawyer, who are different kind of options. Herbig's a quicker, smaller guy. Sawyer's a bigger, stronger guy. I think that what Omar Khan's starting to do is he's figuring out where are these holes that are slowing us up when we're bringing our top guys off and finding ways to fill those holes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this was about getting a bigger body who's going to help out in the run defense. And, last year they brought in Preston Smith mid-season. I thought for a few games he was pretty good, but then he was down, not even dressing, Chris, by the end of the year. So obviously, they didn't get what they wanted out of that trade. Not that it cost them anything. I think it cost them, a sixth or a seventh rounder. But, with Jack Sawyer coming in, I think he's automatically your number 4. He's probably going to see 12, 15 snaps a game. But to me, the interesting part of this pick is who's going to be here 2 or 3 years from now. Like if Jack Sawyer progresses, and we should point out he was a 4th round pick, but a lot of these draft analysts had him like as a late 2nd or an early 3rd round pick. So there's a possibility that he could develop into a starter down the road. So 2027, 2028, is TJ Watt still here? Is Alex Highsmith still here? I mean, I think for the value, getting this guy in the 4th round, he's not going to play a lot this year, maybe not even next year. But if he develops, you have a ready-made starter for you, perhaps in 2027 or 2028 when you might need one.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing here is that you're finding temporary replacements now and guys that can fill in, but you're also looking to see, can you develop a guy into a key player at that position down the line? Because like you said, the stars don't last forever. You need to start to have your guys in place so that they can at least hold it down for a year or two while you try to go get that next guy. Because like right now, the Steelers, they don't need to invest their 1st round picks in edge rusher because Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt are going. But if you have these lower round guys that you draft, they're younger, they hold the mantle whenever those guys do retire or need to leave the team, then eventually you can say, okay, now we're going to go get that 1st round guy so that 1st round guy can learn behind this veteran that we've groomed and is ready to go, and then or they can jump in right away and be the guy if they are that good. So I do agree with that. When you look at the Steelers and how they've used the middle round so far, it seems like Omar Khan is doing a very good job, at least picking his spots where he's going to attack. Like, you look at Peyton Wilson last year, filling in at linebacker, and, I think there were a lot of confusions about what were the expectations supposed to be because they signed Patrick Queen, they had Landon Roberts and Peyton Wilson. There were a lot of questions about, would he be able to play because his knees were so bad, and he was out there making plays in the pass game and the run game. He was flying all over the place with height and speed. And now you're looking at, I think he's one of the more exciting parts of the roster next year, where you're like, hey, if that dude works out, like, he could be the studded linebacker next to Patrick Queen. Like, they could be a dangerous tandem. And another guy, Mason McCormick, a lot of excitement around him. All these key areas where the Steelers are addressing things and guys are finding early reps. Now, I think the other key here, Ray, will be, can the Steelers develop these guys into better starters and better contributors than they came in as rookies?
Yeah, and you look at Peyton Wilson, big plays too. Like that's what I look for. For rookies who are stepping in. Chris, they don't win that home game against Baltimore if he doesn't make that interception. One of the best interceptions I've seen from a linebacker in a long time. I'm not even sure they win at Cincinnati without him. That scoop and score. Yeah. Even though they had a nice cushion after that score, Burrow came back on them after that. So that was a really important play in that football game as well. So yeah, I mean, Omar's done a really nice job of mining the middle rounds of the draft. It's a nod to Tom Donahoe and what he used to do back in the 90s. You remember all the linebackers they used to get, like the 3-4 defense wasn't as prevalent back then, but you got Jason Gilden, I think, in the 3rd round, Joey Porter in the 3rd round. This was a Kevin Colbert pick, but early in Kevin's tenure, got Larry Foote in the 4th round. I mean, all those guys helped them, either compete for championships or, win championships. So you got to have you got to hit on your 1st round picks. Listen, Omar's going to be judged, honestly, by how Broderick Jones does, by how Troy Fautanu does. But when you hit on guys like Herbig and Wilson and hopefully Sawyer in the middle rounds, that's what really makes good drafts. So let's say Fautanu becomes a great player. That's great. But if you want to have a great draft, you got to have other guys, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds filling in behind him. That's how GMs are known for building really good football teams.
How about this for a run of 3rd and 4th round picks? In 1996, they had in the 4th round Earl Holmes, stud linebacker next to LaVon Kirkland. 1997, 3rd round Mike Vrabel. Look, it didn't work out with the Steelers, but heck of a player. In 1998, 3rd round Hines Ward, 4th round Deshae Townsend, two-time Super Bowl champions right there that were key to those runs. In 1999, 3rd round Amos Zaraway, Joey Porter, 4th round Aaron Smith. All huge parts of what the Steelers were building back then. You get Hank Poteet in the 3rd round, and in 2000, Clark Hagan's in the 5th round that year. He was a good depth linebacker for them for some years. So I mean, to your point, and then you brought up Larry Foote, Chris Hope, 2 guys in the 3rd and 4th rounds in 2022 that were there. Ike Taylor in 2003 came in the 4th round. I mean, that's a run of really good middle round hits there, and the Steelers need that, like you said, on top of hitting those early guys. And you think back to some of these draft classes, where they haven't hit in the 1st round. It's also not hitting in those middle rounds. Like you go back to 2019, their 3rd round pick, Justin Lane, Benny Snell, Zach Gentry. Justin Lane didn't last at all. Benny Snell was like an okay 3rd option at running back. Deontay Johnson was a good pick in the 3rd round, but even guys like James Washington didn't work out as 2nd round picks. Chukwueze Okorafor didn't work out. Mason Rudolph as a backup is the best pick of that draft when you kind of look back on it. Of the 2018 year. So I'm right with you. This is an important part of the draft process the Steelers have to nail, and it's still just that this has been the 3rd draft of Omar Khan since he's taken over at GM. So like, it's tough to even I don't like to grade draft classes until I've seen 3 years of the draft class maturing, and then I can be like, okay, now we can really get a sense of who these guys are. They're through their first 3 years. They've shown who they can be. So like this year, will we see more out of Nick Herbig? He's been a really good pass rusher. He needs to work against the run. How good can he develop there? Darnell Washington, how does he grow as a tight end there? Benton, Porter, Jones. That's the class I think is going to be coming up this year to say like, okay, did they work out this year? And then we'll really get to see how good did that class pan out? Not just the names and the excitement behind the names of when they got picked, like we're kind of seeing like right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where you make your money as a GM. That's where you have to do it. The middle rounds of the draft, find some starters there, find some guys who can be key contributors, and your roster is going to be much better for it, 3-5 years down the road.
Absolutely. I want to talk about some of the things that we took notice on about how the Steelers operated with this draft class, and maybe some notes that we can keep for the next time around, because I think that's something that often happens when the players get picked. Everyone just goes home. They think, okay, cool. And then we start talking about these players. But Ray, let's talk in the next segment about what we learned about how the Steelers operated with the notes that we assembled throughout the draft process and what it might tell us about how Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin operate next year in the draft class. We'll deal with that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by UFC Gym. April is Stress Awareness Month, and studies show that doing even one group exercise class a week can significantly reduce stress, so there's no better time to remove your body and reset your mind than at UFC Gym. However, you want to blow off steam, they've got it. They've got boxing, kickboxing, Zumba, MMA, HIIT, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, muscle makeover, spin, yoga, cardio core, bar, youth classes, and silver sneakers. Ready to feel stronger inside and out? Drop in this week at UFC Gym Market Square or in the Waterfront to try a class for free. That's UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, Chris Carter with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers and how they operated this year. Now, I want to point to a quote that you referenced when we were off camera. We were preparing for this show, and it was something that Mike Tomlin said when him and Omar Khan were asked about the investments into Darius Slay and DK Metcalf, because the Steelers didn't pick a receiver in this draft class and they didn't pick a cornerback into the 7th round. And so when Tomlin was asked about it, he said, when free agency hit, and it's a quote, when free agency hit, we had enough time to analyze the draft pool, and we recognized that maybe those were probably good locations to invest in terms of veteran NFL guys. So that's why we did it. So, Ray, that's Mike Tomlin basically saying, we looked at the corners and receivers and we're not impressed, and we said, let's score there right now. So that might have influenced the signing of Slay and the trading for Metcalf more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, especially corners. I mean, look at the the numbers, they threw a corner. In addition to Darius Slay, they brought in Brandon Eccles, they re-signed James Pierre. Not that he's going to be a big part of the rotation, but he is a corner and he's going to play on special teams. So they did bring in a few receivers, right? Like Jaden Higgins, Jaylen Noel, Matthew Golden. So, if the opportunity presented itself, let's say one of those guys fell, they might have taken it if the value was right. But really, if you pay attention to how the Steelers approach these things in the offseason, they drop a lot of clues about, which positions they are going to target and, the other ways they're going to fill out their roster, which obviously they did in free agency with the additions of Metcalf and Slay and Eccles. So, it's interesting how it played out. You look at the top 30 visits, Chris, 9 running backs, 8 defensive linemen, and then they had some quarterbacks mixed in there, a couple of receivers, couple corners. They pretty much told you what they were going to do. First round line, second round running back. So I know a lot of the national draft analysts were kind of fixated on quarterback in the Steelers, but the Steelers kind of laid it out for you if you were paying attention how they were going to team build this offseason.
But I also think it's interesting. I think they laid it out, but they also laid the smokescreen because if you really wanted to believe in quarterback, they also brought in Shedeur Sanders and Jaxson Dart, the 2 first-round guys there. And so, I said this on the live stream when we did our live draft show for Mike's Beer Bar on the nights of the draft. I said all along, everyone at the Post-Gazette, we've been banging the table telling you D-tackle was the move in the first round. Do not buy the Shedeur Sanders hype, the quarterback hype, the Steelers. That's not where they're going. And lo and behold, we ended up being right about that. But I think a big part of this is when you look at how this is assembled, the Steelers, it wasn't that just Mike Tomlin just threw that comment out randomly. They stacked it. They talked to Shedeur Sanders. They made sure that they were there. And it's clear that Shedeur Sanders felt pretty good about himself because he was talking about George Pickens, DK Metcalf could be the number one tandem in the NFL on his podcast and stuff before the draft. So clearly they laid in some work to set everyone up to think, oh yeah, the Steelers are going in that direction. But meanwhile, they made sure several of their picks were actually were brought in. You look at Derek Harmon, top 30 visit. Yahya Black, top 30 visit. Kaleb Johnson, top 30 visit. Now they didn't bring in Will Howard, so that was one of the guys they did, but they talked to him at the combine, and it seemed like he had a good sense that they liked him. So maybe that was the quarterback that they were trying to stuff in the back locker, be like, hey, you know what? No one look at him, like the old John Stallworth, like, hey, don't pay attention to that guy back there. Like we're look at this guy over here, and I think that's kind of what the strategy was. And it worked out as far as getting the guys that it seems like they wanted. We still got to see if it works out with the right guys because these could end up being, bad picks. Who knows? We could end up being great picks. But that's where I think this there's some interesting tidbits that we can use as far as next year when we're looking at who they're bringing in with their visits and the classes that they're assembled. It's not just focusing on one person. It's looking at how they're handling the entire class. And now also, to your point, also matching that up with who did they go get in free agency? Like if next year they go get a safety in free agency, or if they go get, a guard, then we know, hey, that's not going to be a priority next year. Maybe bump that down the list quite a bit.
And the final question of the Tuesday news conference, 2 days before the draft, somebody asked him about safety, and he basically said, well, we signed Juan Thornhill. So he almost laid it out there, like we're not going to draft a safety. It's interesting, Chris, if you look at it, Omar has been in charge of 3 drafts now. 12 of the 21 draft picks have come in for top 30 visits. So, that's a pretty good percentage of players that they bring in. And, Mike, you're right. Mike does like to maybe lay a smokescreen out there once in a while. He even made reference to that, in that same Tuesday news conference. He said, I like to make you guys think when I'm moving around at these pro days and who I'm talking to, how I'm interacting with them. So there's gamesmanship there. It's part of the competition when you're trying to, keep your cards close to your vest. But, I maintain if you pay close enough attention, and we really do here, we track these top 30 visits. We're paying attention to what happens at these pro days, who's at dinner, that stuff like that. You can get a pretty good feel for how the Steelers are going to approach these drafts.
I'd say it's more of an art than a science, but it's an art that we're getting pretty good at here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So if you want to know who the Steelers are going to draft next year, be sure to stick with us all throughout the process. But still a lot more to go before we even get to this season, let alone next year's draft. We've got rookie camp in a few weeks here, then OTAs, then mini camp. We've got a lot to explore as far as what the Steelers are doing, how they're exploring it, and we still don't know when will Aaron Rodgers sign. We'll keep you up to date with all of that here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Be sure to subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Be sure to check out this show every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those episodes. From Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo, thanks for tuning in to another episode. We'll see you here Friday on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.